What's good, YouTube? It's me, your boy Squid, back in another Squid video. The OCG just came out with a rulings overturn that is very, very relevant for the competitive Yu-Gi-Oh metagame. And this is kind of blowing my mind because I thought this was always how this ruling should have worked. But the ruling is when a monster is summoned to a player's side of the table and control immediately shifts before you get a chance to activate the effect, who gets to activate the effect? So, for example, in the case where an opponent has IP Masquerena, and then Yugioh triple tactics talent to take, and the opponent chains the effect of IP to summon, they link off into Nightmare Unicorn, and immediately upon the resolution of the chain, Tactics takes control of the same unicorn that was summoned. Who gets the effect? Well, currently in the TCG, the player who summoned the Nightmare Unicorn gets the effect, despite the control shifting before the effect had a chance to activate. So actually, our opponent would still get the ability to activate the Nightmare Unicorn, which is weird. But today, we got a new ruling. Shout out to the Malaysian Yu-Gi-Oh community Facebook channel for bringing this up. But in the OCG rulings database, this has been overruled. It says, previously, if a monster has an on-summon trigger effect, the player that controls it the moment that the monster was summoned onto the field will be the one who triggers that effect, regardless of who has control. But today, this has changed because Konami has updated 2 new rulings revolving around such scenarios in the database. Now the current controller of the monster will be the one who activates the trigger effect when that trigger effect could be activated, meaning if the player takes control of the newly summoned Nightmare Unicorn, that player will then be able to activate the effect. For example, they gave the rulings database directly from Konami, which cites your opponent activates the effect of IP Masquerena and special summons SP Little Knight in a chain to your activation of Triple Tactics talent. If you gain control of SP Little Knight due to the effect of Triple Tactics talent, you will be the player that can activate the first effect of SP Little Knight, which is the effect to banish a card from the field or the graveyard. So this is kind of crazy. This is actually a very relevant ruling, especially given how popular a card that doesn't target like Triple Tactics talent is in the metagame, right? Like, a lot of players are playing Tactics right now, and IP Masquerena will see a resurgence with the release of this quirky little card here, which is more or less a staple moving forward for basically every deck. Like, even decks that don't play Link Monsters will try to accommodate this card because it's so freaking generic, and it's just so good. So there will definitely be a lot of opportunity for Tactics against IP Masquerena to be a very common scenario, I think, moving forward in competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! At least until Tactics or Thrust and Tactics and also IP or SP rather gets hit on the ban list, which is probably not going to happen for some time. So the fact that this is happening is crazy. But guys, bear in mind that this is only for the OCG at this moment. What Konami R&D tends to do is release rulings to test the waters in the OCG before porting them over inevitably to the TCG. And I think basically all of these ruling reversals back in the day have somewhat, in some shape or form, hit the TCG eventually, like the major ones at least. We still have some subtle differences like end phases and standby phases, like who gets to use your effects first. But generally, I think rulings that are very big like this will actually hit the TCG. Like, we did see like the Rukalos versus the IP Masquerena, if I'm not mistaken, that actually came over from the OCG, which then said that, yeah, in the TCG, you can also negate it. And then there was also the infamous priority ruling about 10 years ago. If you guys remember back then, when you summoned a monster, same thing in Edison format, you as a turn player get priority to activate an ignition effect as a quick effect, as if it was like a trigger effect. It's crazy, right? But what happened was Konami in Japan actually overrode that for the OCG and said, hey guys, you don't get priority anymore when you summon a monster or play an action. Instead, it becomes a closed game state where both players can respond to that summon window. So we can now effect Veiler things that banishes cost, like Rescue Rabbit, whereas previously you actually couldn't. But it took like over a year, I think, for that ruling to actually hit the TCG, where they said, okay, you guys don't have priority anymore. You can finally play effect Veiler for Lone Fire Blossom, which inevitably triggered Effect Veiler to be one of the most prominent staple hand traps of all time. Back in the day, it wasn't that great because of priority, right? Because you just dodge Effect Veiler, and it's just like, okay, well, I can't Veiler a quick effect on an ignition effect. So I think this ruling will come to the TCG, but I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on this because this is very relevant, right? Like, everyone's playing Tactics, everyone's playing SP and also IP. There will be scenarios where this does come up inevitably when you do have a card that says, hey, don't target. Non-targeting, take control of something, and when that causes opponents to use effects, I think it definitely spins the game in a way that IP Masquerena is a little worse. And I think that people will obviously not be chaining their IP Masquerena because if you take it, now we get the effect to banish with the SP, right? So It's kind of like a weird scenario, but I think overall, because this ruling was also a bit of a mishmash, like sometimes judges ruled it differently. It was like depending on the head judge. I think this is great to have consistency, and I hope they bring it to TCG. But also, there are a bunch of other cards that this also comes up against. Obviously, branded in red, when they do make Guardian Chimera, and then you resolve tactics to steal the Guardian Chimera, you would now get to draw. So it's kind of cool that there's some interactions there that previously made it very, very hard for a player going second, even with tactics to play through, but now makes it so tactics helps you play through that. So I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts in the comments below. Let me know if this is a good or bad change, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks for tuning in.